Why don't we begin in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And this is a litany for humility. So the response is, deliver me, O Jesus. From the desire of being esteemed by others, deliver me, O Jesus. From the desire of being honored more than others, deliver me, O Jesus. From the desire of being praised over others, deliver me, O Jesus. From the desire of being preferred to others, deliver me, O Jesus. From the desire of being approved, deliver me, O Jesus. From the fear of being humiliated, deliver me, O Jesus. From the fear of being despised, deliver me, O Jesus. From the fear of being forgotten, deliver me, O Jesus. From the fear of being ridiculed, deliver me, O Jesus. From the fear of being wronged, deliver me, O Jesus. From the need to be right, deliver me, O Jesus. From the need to be praised, deliver me, O Jesus. From the need to be popular, deliver me, O Jesus. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. It goes on, but I like that. It's much longer. But obviously, in case you missed it, today's talk is going to be on humility. So what's so great about humility? And here's the odd part, just talking about virtues again. You know, St. Paul says that you have to have the mind of Christ. Well, I just think in the modern world, there's this overemphasis that discipleship is having the right catechetical answers. But in one sense, having the mind of Christ means to be imbued with the virtues of Christ, one of which is humility. And I talked about this last time, but they did this interesting workplace psychology on humility. And nobody really thinks humility is a great power, but it really is. And even going back to basketball, Butler University, the coach there, who now is the coach of Brad Stevens of the Boston, I want to say Celtics, but it's Celts. We'll mispronounce that. But Butler University spends very little on recruiting, and yet, shockingly, it has great basketball. During the NCAA tournament, they're beating teams that were much bigger and had $1 million budgets. And Brad Stevens says they developed this way called the Butler Way. And that is, he only took, yes, talented players who showed humility, that with humility they can work with others. And he emphasized this culture of humility called the Butler Way. And so they asked him in this interview, and I like this, he said, but what if you have some great player, some fantastic basketball player, but had an ego? And he said, it wouldn't take him. He destroys the team. And it really is a great interview, where he says, no, without humility, even a great basketball player alone, he'll destroy the team. We're supposed to make the team better. And so the power of humility is that it really allows you to work with other people. So just before I continue, I thought, is the volume okay, or it's a little loud? I'm worried about my hearing because I hear no static. To me, it's... Well, I know. To me, all I hear is kind of this soft, velvety, smooth jazz sound. Yeah. Humility. Very good. So, what is humility? So, humility is not weakness. I really don't like how people use the word humility because I confuse it with weakness or low self-esteem. Humility is low self-preoccupation. The real enemy in life is your ego. And humility is to be freed from it. And just a great example of humility when I was growing up was actually we had a very holy bishop. And his name was Bishop Trinan. Most people probably don't remember him. He really was a great bishop. But his overall virtue, one of them was humility. He had his clerics, and then outside his clerics, he had a white t-shirt and a green t-shirt. And he gave up the bishop's mansion, and he lived in this 2-bedroom apartment in the poorer section of Boise. He had this ripped, what do you call that, lazy boy recliner. And here's the other thing. He was very happy. None of that stuff ever mattered to him. Power didn't matter to him. So, he had a little bit of problem with the Catholic Church because, he didn't like displays of power. In fact, when he was named bishop, he was, I think, from North Dakota, just a farmer boy. He's named bishop, and they fly him back to Rome, to Washington, D.C. to have lunch with the pronuncio. And that's all it was to have lunch with the pronuncio. And fly back, and when he comes back, he says, well, I don't know, that's a cockeyed way to run a church. Where you spent all that money just going out to lunch, and he just refused to do things that were crazy like that. But he was really, he loved the people, he loved the church. If you met him once, he could keep his calendar in his brain, which I can. But if he met you once, he would remember your name 10 years ago. And he was so humble. And the odd part was, so in the seminary, he goes down to Menlo Park in the seminary, and he's going to have breakfast with the Idaho seminarians in the morning. So he's outside the rectory, and one of the Idaho seminarians, who never really gets up early, goes into the rectory from refectory from the other end, and he's waiting for Bishop Trinan, and he hears now, I don't mean to be rude, I'm just being honest. The Californian seminarians are a little shishi foo-foo. And he's waiting, and he's listening to a table, and at the table, they're kvetching because there's some old man, homeless man, outside the refectory. And they were upset because the rector of the seminary sometimes would feed the homeless if they came by in the refectory, and so they're complaining, and suddenly the Idaho seminarian, because Trinan is never late, says, wait a minute, what did this homeless man look like? He was wearing black pants, old man, bald, white t-shirt. He says, that's my bishop. And he said, you should have seen these seminarians. Once he found out he was a bishop, they were like, oh, can I get you coffee? Can I? And here's the odd part. This priest told me this about Trinan, where this priest says, who is friends with Trinan, he says, he has no golden boys. So if you want to kiss up to Trinan, it won't do any good. He treats everybody with the same equality. He doesn't play favorites. And to me, honest, I think that's part of his great humility. Humility is not weakness or low self-esteem. It's actually to be free from one's ego. And secondly, another word for humility is really reality. The virtue of humility is just to accept reality, to see yourself and other people and the world truly for what it is, with all its faults and sins and even beauty. It is also seeing the fake for being fake. Trinan could name what is fake and didn't want to participate in it. But really, do most people see reality or live in a fantasy? Humility, it gives us the power to see reality. Thirdly, humility makes us more human. Actually, just the word humility means, humus, the soil. The idea of humility, even in the word, means it makes us more human. That to have humility, your humanity grows. Now, there's this great story in the book of Daniel about King Nebuchadnezzar. It's a really strange one. It's a great story where Nebuchadnezzar, he's in Babylon, and he looks around Babylon. Now, Babylon at this time was one of the 7 wonders of the world with the hanging gardens. And he looks around his kingdom, and he says, I have done all this. He's done this. Look at what I've done. I've conquered the world, made this great architecture, and he brags to himself. And he has this dream the next night, about this tree, this huge tree that gets cut down to its roots. and says, and I should have looked it up, didn't have time, for so many months, you'll have the claws of an eagle, the hair of a lion, this strange description. And anyhow, he doesn't know what this dream means, so he asks Daniel, and Daniel says, oh, yes, I can interpret that dream. It means you're going to become a beast. For so many months, you'll live like a beast. And it happens. Nebuchadnezzar gets a strange mental illness, and his fingernails aren't clipped, and his hair goes wild. And on the palace grounds, he lost his mind, was wandering around for several months like this beast. And after that, his mind clears up, and he gets what the dream means. To become truly human is through the way of humility. The way of arrogance leads you into becoming this beast, this unhuman thing. Isn't that a great story that's in the Bible? Your arrogance makes you less human. And so in the end, Nebuchadnezzar praises God for this trouble that he had. So the opposite of humility is pride. And pride makes us not completely, but less human. And not only is there an opposite to a virtue, but there's also a counterfeit. So I know that sounds kind of strange, but in the Bible, you always have this thing of something real, religious, and it's counterfeit. I'll give you an example. You have Lady Wisdom, who goes out in the book of Proverbs. She goes out and she sings a song to all humanity, not just the Israelites, to everybody, begging them to come to a meal that she's made. And if you can hear her song, Lady Wisdom will teach you wisdom and feed you with the food of eternity. And she has a counterpart, and that's Lady Folly. And she screams at people. And if you follow her, she'll lead you to a meal that will actually make you more hungry, more lost. Does that make sense? So you have, always in the Bible, you have this evil likes to try and dress up as good. So everything, we'd say, even the virtues. The counterfeit of joy is happiness. Not that happiness is evil, but like narcissists can feel happiness. But oddly enough, narcissists can't feel joy. Happiness is a fleeting feeling. Does that make sense? It's fleeting, it's pleasurable. They can feel that. Joy is lasting. Narcissists can't feel guilt or joy. So humility, the opposite of that is pride, but the counterfeit of that is false humility. It looks like humility, but it's not. And I'll give you an example. If you ever read Pride and Prejudice, you know they had a movie. Well, Jane Austen was very observant of human nature. And one of the three sisters, Mary, the oldest one, whose name I forget, is beautiful. Lizzie is smart but kind of has a mouth. And Mary is the plain one of the sisters. So to make herself stand out, Mary's become very religious and always says these pedantic, silly things about, oh, well, you always must be humble, you must be humble. So she wants to be more spiritual, but her humility is actually a way of always appearing superior to her sisters. Does that make sense? So she comes out with these shallow, pedantic kind of spirituality. Well, the contrast of humility is false humility. And you find that all the time. Once you see it, you can see it everywhere, where people like to act humble, but it's really to do their superiority. It's like the humble brag. Do you know what the humble brag is? Oh, really? Oh, you don't know that? It's very big. Humble brag is saying like, oh, gosh, I wish people would stop confusing me with a supermodel. Or, so they often once a year have like actresses and actresses tweets that they put out. And it's really kind of funny. Talk about this industry that's obsessed with the humble brag. If you really read their tweets, a lot of them are just humble brags. Like, oh, I feel so bad that I'm so loved, and you know what I mean? Like, they always have that, the actors and actresses humble brag. But anyhow, the point being is that all that stuff makes us less human. Even the word humility, my third point, is that it makes us more human. Now, there's also a danger with a lack of humility. So the danger of a lack of humility, number one, is without humility, success will destroy you. There's this proverb that says that, but I found that to be very true. That's exactly like what the Butler way is. Without humility, you'll destroy the team. I told the story of Sean Battier, if you know that story. Do you guys hear? How many people know the story of? Really? Only one person listened to my homily 2 weeks ago. Is that what you're telling me? Just really? You guys don't remember that? Okay. So it's the Miami Heat basketball team when they had the three kings. And I just love it where, oh God, now I can see him. I can't forget his name. LeBron James says, winning is going to be so easy because now they have the best basketball players. But the problem is they're all stars. And the problem with superstars is that they actually don't really work well with a team. That's a really strange part. Yeah, they're fantastically talented, but without humility, the team can't really coalesce. So they bring in Sean Battier, Batman, and he does all these things. Like, he's a great basketball player, but he's not a superstar. He's a role player. And he does things that most people won't see that makes the team come together. And even he said in this interview, he's really smart, which, you know, you kind of think dumb basketball player. He's really smart. It's great to listen to him in an interview. And he says, there's no way I can make LeBron James a better basketball player, but I can make us a better team. And he does all these things to make them a better team, and they start to win. The point being is that without humility, success will kill you. Even the Romans, you know, when Caesar would come in, there'd be a slave behind Caesar saying, basically, remember you're only a man. So they have the motto, a sword cuts a general and the private the same way. They have this, workplace psychologists did this thing with top investors in Wall Street. And logically, they take the top investors, they put them on one team, and that should be a super team of investors. They actually, their profits go down because they can't work with each other. You need some role players who can bring humility. And they did this really interesting study that I just think is stunning. That the study that those who take a step up on the ladder of success actually need to work harder at humility. Because the more power you have, oddly enough, the more yes men you have around you. And you surround yourself by these yes men, and you start to lose this realistic vision of both yourself and your position within a company. So the higher you go, actually you need more humility. You have to work at it. And I know this other bishop, I'm not going to say who irritatingly always loves to say things like, you know, I have the ability to look at people and know what their gifts are. I just can assign people to a gift, and to a priest to a position, and I just know he's going to be a success. Now, what drives me up the wall about that is that I'm screaming in my head whenever I read that, like, what proof do you have? Because the proof I have is that he has all these yes men around him, and with every decision he makes, he says, oh my God, that was great, that was amazing. And I know parishes where his priests are who the parish is literally dying. And he's assigned a priest there, but because the priest is his buddy, he thinks everything's great. Does that make sense? Like, the higher you go up, the more you need humility. Otherwise, you'll start living in this bubble. You need to work at humility with the more success you have. And there's this constant theme in history that without humility, success will destroy you. The humble win. Look at Abraham. Actually, the Bible says, or Talmud said, the more he got, the humbler he became. Or Israel. Israel chose them because they were the smallest, weakest tribe. They were the most humble. They were literally slaves. As God says, you didn't even own your own land and I freed you. God could work with the humble. But then when, really just a couple generations away after with King Solomon, they become enormously wealthy and arrogant and the kingdom is ruined. God calls Israel, just a couple generations later, a new Egypt. There's a study on leaders that, oddly enough, the more likely great leaders are to come from the humble origins than those who are surrounded by privilege. Humility seems to inspire success. Humility is, in that sense, logical to success because you have a better view of reality. And oddly enough, just like Israel, success may be the worst thing that happens to you if you lack humility. Does that make sense? That's why without humility, success is a danger. Here's another one. Without humility, you can become too cynical. An example is that, cynical people, they might be able to see the world, but they say things like, I'm so smart, I truly see things the way they are, I see corruption, nobody's getting anything past me. But that's kind of a lack of humility because all you're seeing is corruption, none of the beauty. They don't really see reality. They're just very attuned at the faults of the world. A humble person can see both the faults and the beauty. So without humility, I think you become too cynical. Without humility, we can become narcissists. And narcissism is the modern disease right now. And if you doubt me, I'm going to give you a couple proofs. Here's this. Gallup poll does this test among high school students every year, seniors. And the one question is, are you a very important person? In 1950, 12% of high schooler seniors said yes. In 2005, 80% of high school seniors said, yes, I'm a very important person. Narcissism is increasing, or even math. If you look at math scores, I think this is amazing. We are now 36 in the world at math performance. But if you ask any American student, are you really good at math? Are we really good at math in the United States? Most say, yeah, we're number one. No, we're 38th. And the people who score that they're not good on math, the country that says that not good at math is South Korea, who think that they're the worst, but actually, oddly enough, they're number one. Or self-esteem articles. In 1962, there's 10 articles on self-esteem in education journals. By 1992, there's 2,500 per year. Everybody's worried about their the kids having self-esteem. Or fame. In 2006, 51% of 25-year-olds said being famous is the most important thing in life. That's twice as many that said being famous is more important than being moral. Isn't that amazing? Or, this sounds strange, risks. The problem with ego is that you become self-obsessed, and it leads to overconfidence. So they start taking out bigger loans. They take bigger risks. The more, no offense, narcissistic you become. If you're betting on Wall Street, no offense, those are people with some really big egos. They're willing to take risks because they just assume they'll never lose. And if you think, did you see that movie, The Big Short? It's a great movie. All these Wall Street experts couldn't see the crash coming because of their ego. Ego is the problem, and the cure is humility. Or one more proof that narcissism is a modern disease is moral inarticulateness. If you're a narcissist, no offense, you have a real hard time articulating morality. I just think it's kind of ironic that I couldn't say that word. That's a Freudian slip. But we trained a generation who are good, but in one sense so inarticulate about morality. Notre Dame did a study where they asked college students to name a moral dilemma. So all you had to do is name a moral dilemma. 2/3 could not name a moral dilemma. They'd say things like, well, if I pulled into a parking space, is there enough time? Do I have enough quarters for all the time? That's not a moral dilemma. That's just a problem. Does that mean, so they're inarticulate of what is even morality. The conclusion is that narcissism is a modern disease. Now, the truth is also, it's kind of amazing. Narcissism falls on a spectrum. It's not really either or. Many young people, no offense, millennials, are on the lower end, a high percentage. And that's, the lower end is called practical narcissist versus a deep narcissist. So there's a scale. And this German psychologist did this great work about whole transformation, because he knew he was a practical narcissist. At least he had the ability to see that. So he starts trying to think, well, how do you cure narcissism? Do you know how you cure narcissism? Regular practice of humility. So my only point being is that, wow, the cure to modern narcissism, this disease we have, is humility. And just in the Bible, it literally says, so just so there's no wiggle room here, God hates the proud. Well, that's pretty clear. God says, I hate the proud and the arrogant. The book of James says, God opposes the proud. But the Greek word oppose, and I know it sounds kind of, it's written in the present and constant sense. So God is always opposing, did oppose, does oppose, and will always oppose the proud. The proud want glory for themselves, not glory for God. They're narcissists. And so we want to move ourselves, hopefully, from being practical narcissists to true human beings. And the 12 apostles, if you really look at it, they're all practical narcissists. Remember, Jesus says, I'm going to suffer and die, right? Tells them the prediction of the cross, gives a speech on humility. Then they walked away, and when they get home, Jesus says, what were you talking on the way about? You know what they were arguing about? Who is the greatest? He just gave a speech about humility and dying, and they have this need for greatness, not for humility. And Jesus gives this great speech. You know how the Gentiles, they love to lord their authority over. It must not be like that with you. They love to lord their power over people, and then people call them benefactors when they're ruining their lives. He says it must not be that way with you. So we need humility, and that's why Jesus speaks about humility and the cross at the same time. That humility is dying to your ego. But the 12 think that religion is supposed to give you glory and power. Now here's the odd thing. Religion is not supposed to give you glory and power. You hear that a lot of time from many religious people. You know what religion is supposed to give you? A cross. There's a certain danger to life without humility, but also humility gives gifts. And this sounds kind of strange. I never thought about this, but humility also gives us grit. And I mention that because there's this book called Good to Great, and the book studies people who combined extreme personal humility with extreme personal power. So that's really an odd connection, that those who are humble, who are not self-obsessed, they not only have a vision to the direction of their life, they also have incredible willpower. Isn't that just kind of interesting? And here's the odd part. Those who increase their power need humility, because without humility, what you rely upon is your authoritative power. Does that make sense? So everybody has to agree with me. That means you're losing your humility, and instead of having willpower, you're relying on political or administrative power. So humility gives you willpower. Humility allows you to learn. There's an old line by Emerson that says, every man I meet is in some way my superior, that I can learn from him. Galileo said something similar, where he said, I have never met a man so ignorant that I can't learn something from him. We could update this to the 21st century. Basically, close your mouth and open your ears. That's how I would put it. If you're humble, you can learn from everyone. If you think you're superior to everybody, then you really can't learn from them. The danger is, don't go around thinking that you're superior in everything. You may be an expert in one field, but not everything. You don't need to talk down to people. They have something to teach you. You don't need to go around looking stupid for saying stupid things. We all say stupid things. You want to go around saying, I don't have all the answers, but I can learn. That's what humility does. This sounds kind of strange, but there's this scripture scholar who is just brilliant, speaks many languages, super brilliant, and I drove him to the airport once, and he was so humble. He loved the green. He really was just a major biblical scholar. But on the way to the airport, he was asking me questions. Well, what do you think about this? And I thought, but you're the scripture scholar. He had a natural inquisitiveness. Then about the same time, I was a seminarian, there's this bishop who, there were some problems in the diocese that a bunch of lay people wanted to have some open house to discuss things. And he refused to have the open house because he said, because they won't listen to me. They want me to listen to them. Now you realize how lack of, the scripture scholar wants to hear from other people. The bishop, the people, there's a problem, but he thinks the problem is that the people aren't listening to him. Anyhow, I think that's amazing because, I've met neurosurgeons and astrophysicists who every time you learn something, it raises 10 more questions. So the more you learn, the more questions there are. But the person who thinks that they're an expert in one field without humility thinks they're an expert in every field. The story about the 4 guys on the plane, right? Who the plane is going down and one guy thinks he's a doctor and he thinks he's a genius. Another guy's an accountant. Another guy's a lawyer. And the last guy is just a firefighter. And so the plane is going down, and there's only 3 parachutes. So the doctor says, I'm a neurosurgeon. I'm the smartest one here. I need this parachute. Takes it and jumps out of the plane. And the other 3 say, well, who's going to get the other 2 parachutes? And the firefighter says, I don't know, but the smartest man in the world just jumped out of the plane with my backpack. If you're humble, you may be an expert in one field, but you're not an expert in all fields. You can still learn so much from other people. So that's why enlightenment only comes to the humble. Just because you realize your own ignorance, you can realize I am really good in this field, ignorant in everything else. That's why it says the humble can be taught by God. Isn't that a great line from Sirach? The humble can be taught by God. The arrogant are stiff-necked and can't learn from God. I just like that in the book of Sirach, that those who think they have all the answers know nothing. The humble, they know everything. That was in Sirach last time. Also, the humble, they can pray. If you notice in Luke, Jesus tells a story about this Pharisee who goes to pray. You know the story, right? The parable. He goes to the front pew, prays, thanks God for being so much superior to everybody else. And Jesus says, if you read the parable, it says he goes and talks to himself. He's not really praying to God. He talks to himself about how great he is. Then you have the sinner in the back of the church who simply says, I'm a sinner, and in his prayer, he actually admits his state in life. And Jesus said, one went away justified, one didn't. One actually spoke with God, one didn't. The humble, they can have a relationship with God. So they can get out of themselves and truly into this conversation, this relationship with God. The arrogant can't. The humble have to, the arrogant, the ego, always has to impose its ideas and self on other people, while the humble, they can just show up for a relationship. That's what's hard about narcissists. Narcissists are the opposite of somebody who's humble, is that you can't really have a relationship with a narcissist, or only like one part. And it's kind of like this. Did you ever read the, I don't know why I asked that question, but did you ever read the book Children of Narcissus? It was kind of a good book, but I thought it was really insight that the children of narcissists really don't have a relationship with their parent. Because let's say I'm your parent and I'm a narcissist and you're the child. I only relate to you for what you can give me. So it's kind of like a candy machine that here's all of you. I only relate to those parts of you that makes me look good. Does that make any sense? And the kid knows. Like I told this story, it's kind of awful, years ago, where I was watching the news. I've told this story. I was just shocked. Where this kid died in a sporting accident, and they interviewed the parents. And the interview is, the parents are sitting there on the couch, and the interviewer asks, why did you love your son? And the father says, well, he was so good at sports, and starts to go off on what sports he was good at. And I thought, holy cow, like what a narcissist. Like that's disgusting. Why do I love my son? Because he was my son. Not because he made me look good with the sports that he did. Does that make any sense? Like I kind of thought, oh my God, well, I feel sorry for the child. If you grew up with a child like that, a child of a narcissist, you don't have a relationship with your parent. Narcissists can't really have deep relationships. They can only have relationships where you give me something. The humble, they can have a relationship with other people and with God. The fifth one is the humble are secure. They don't need a lot of props. Think of like Bishop Trident. Bishop Trident didn't need a lot of props to prove his security. He needed really very little. Or there's this great story, I like this one, about the first man to climb Mount Everest. He's the first man to ever climb Mount Everest, and he's at this hiking expedition, and some people recognize him. They ask him to take a picture with an ice pick. So he poses for the ice pick. Now, there's something I like about this, where then some amateur person didn't know that he's the world famous mountain climber, and goes over and says, no, let me show you how to hold an ice pick. Like he was just holding it for the picture, not because he was about to use it. And the guy in this story just says, oh, I didn't know that, and takes it. But there's something noble and powerful and beautiful about being able to hold your pride back rather than say, hey, idiot. He doesn't need to do this. The humble, they don't need displays of power or defensiveness. That's what the weak of ego need. So anyhow, I just think the humble, they don't need titles or to drive a certain car or labels to prove their self-worth. That's what narcissists do. Why are people willing to go into massive credit card debt just for appearances? And it's because they lack the power of humility. A humble person is secure. Eisenhower said this, and I just like this line from Eisenhower. He said, confidence is quiet. Incompetence is loud. Like, what he meant is, this time in the military, people that are incompetent, they always need megaphones of how great they are. A truly competent person is quiet. I've actually found that to be very true. Even Christ warns about the danger of humble versus the supposed powerful. They love to show their importance and have you call them benefactors. The humble, they don't need those things. Or I told the story before, but I like it about Joe Louis on the bus. Okay, so I told that story. I like Joe Louis. He's on this bus, and these 3 kids on the bus start to harass him. He gets harassed on a bus by teenagers. Isn't that amazing? And he doesn't do anything. He doesn't react. But when it's time for him to get off, because they're picking a fight with him. You're picking a fight with Joe Louis. So when he gets off the bus, well, he was black, but when he gets off the bus, he hands them his card. He could have taken them at any moment. He doesn't need displays of power. Does that make sense? So Jesus, when he comes into Jerusalem, most would come in on war horses. He comes in on a donkey, which is a sign of humility. That's 7th is the humble can see beauty. Now, once again, I'm getting this from the book of Sirach, but I really believe it's true. Sirach says, the humble, the Holy Spirit can give hokmah to. And that means beauty, but it means artistic beauty. The humble, when they see the world, the Holy Spirit gives them the ability to say, oh, I see what's beautiful about this person and this person, this person, and this situation. The arrogant can't see the beauty in other people. So the humble can enjoy the gifts and the beauty of other people and creation, where the narcissist needs to make sure everybody thinks and recognize their beauty. Does that make sense? So I love that about the hokmah, that humility allows you to know your gifts as well as other people's gifts. The envious, they can't be happy. Even like Bishop Trinan, that's one thing I really liked about Bishop Trinan. Bishop Trinan openly knew that he was bad at preaching. Sorry, he was. He was a terrible preacher. But he would say to go up to priests at like some Dawson event, he said, would you preach? He knew who was the good preachers and who weren't. And he enjoyed good preaching. He just didn't have that gift. And a lot of times at every, this is kind of strange, but at Dawson's celebrations, the bishop usually gives a homily. He doesn't have to. He can pass it off. But then he has somebody write it for him. I just admire Trinan for saying, no, he openly admits, no, I'm terrible at preaching. Isn't that just great that a bishop can say that? So humility, we'd say, is a power that gives something to us. And I mentioned this at Mass, but I love this. There's a Greek letter, tau. It looks like a T. So the Greek letter tau in the Old Testament, the prophet gets a view of heaven. And all those in heaven who are going to be saved, this angel goes and puts this invisible tau mark on their forehead. In the book of Revelation, God writes humility on everybody's head in the book of Revelation, and he does it by making a tau on their forehead. Tau is a symbol of humility. So like St. Francis loved the idea of tau. So if you ever seen a Franciscan cross, it's a tau. If you really look at like a cross, that's a tau. That's a T, not a cross. Francis wanted his order to have the gift of humility and serve the humble. So he took tau, the least Greek symbol, as our letter. Now here's the odd part. If the Bible says twice it says in the Bible, all those in heaven have humility written on their forehead, you know it's written several times in your life on your forehead. Once in your baptism, where if you're baptized, were you baptized as a baby? Mm-hmm. Are you sure? Do you have any proof?
I don't know today, but I know I was.
Kids these days. So her parents and godparents and probably grandparents and everybody gathered at the door of the church, and they would have traced the sign of the cross on her forehead and then over their own bodies. It does mean like we're connected through baptism of the Holy Spirit, but also it's marking the child out as a future citizen of heaven. Then even like when you get your last rites before you die, the priest takes oil and makes a cross on your forehead, the towel on your forehead. He's marking you as a citizen of heaven. We've all have, my only point is, liturgically, we have humility written across our foreheads. We're supposed to be a humble people. We celebrate it liturgically. So then the question is, well, how do you gain humility? How do you gain humility? Well, I just have a couple suggestions. One, avoid pride. I mean, yes, it's obvious that it sours the mind and heart, but I think you have to make a concerted effort to avoid pride. Like, that's why Jesus said, avoid titles and props. You know when Jesus says, call no man your father, no man your teacher, no man your master? Well, fundamentalists would say, oh, see, there you go. You call priest father. Well, Peter has people call him his father. Paul is called a father. It's right there in the Bible. It's not about the word father. It's about taking joy in your position, your title. But also, Christ criticized people for needing props for their ego. So that's when I say avoid pride. That's what I mean. Like, even like for me, Trinan didn't allow monsignors. Isn't that kind of amazing? Because you know, what's the difference between a priest and a monsignor?
Money.
Mostly money. And that's not completely true. If you get a job from the diocesan office position, such as called Vicar General, you're addressed as Monsignor. But you can buy the title Monsignor. So what's the difference between a Monsignor priest? About $5,000. There's different titles. There's 5,000 to 7,000. But Trinan didn't allow that in Idaho because, no, if you're a priest, and you do the work because you enjoy the work, not because you get some title. Even Pope Francis has come out against monsignors. I just think it's wise because it avoids displays of pride. Secondly, avoid power. Well, that's a hard one because the world works by power. But no, the world works by authority, not necessarily power. Does that make sense? Like a priest and a bishop is given authority. And the authority is a type of power. But Trinan, for example, he was given authority, he had the power to assign priests and all that other stuff, but he avoided displays of power himself. Didn't earn for it. Does that make sense? He just wanted to be the servant. Jesus himself makes this distinction between power and authority. We do work, like the Catholic Church works by authority, but it's not supposed to work by power. Third, practice honesty. And the reason why I say that is, that's my big thing. I jump way too quickly to defend my opinion. Does that make sense? Somebody asks me a question, to be honest, I'm already halfway through thinking of my response, which means I didn't hear them. Like, that's a lack of honesty. You have to learn to accept correction, and you have to kind of welcome it. And that takes a long time. Like I told my pastoral council, I expect you to give me feedback if I'm messing up. If there's a problem in the community or I'm messing up, I want feedback. I have 24 parishioners who I have this, it's on Google Doc reviews, where after every homily they can judge how the readings went and how was the homily. Like, I want to know, am I doing a good job? Are the readings doing a good job? Now, to be honest, only about 4 people now, they did it at first, but now nobody's giving feedback, so it didn't really work. But like, I just remember my mother saying, you should welcome criticism. I don't know why she told me that, but that is actually one of my faults. You have to learn to accept criticism and thank God for it. You need instruments of feedback, because my accuracy of myself is kind of like looking in a circus mirror. When I look at myself, I just think I'm great. So clearly, I need a new mirror. But the humble, they accept correction. They allow other people to speak truth to them. So my only point is that if you want to gain humility, get some source that can give you criticism. Like I have the app, I have other pastoral counsel. I want to receive criticism from some people. So the Irish tradition of an Anam Cara is a spiritual director. So we have an Anam Cara group here at Holy Apostles. Now, what you're supposed to do is pray for an Anam Cara. Anam Cara is Gaelic for soul friend, not a best friend, a soul friend. And you meet with them once a month for spiritual direction. But the Anam Cara takes a vow to keep whatever you say secret. But the Anam Cara is supposed to give you honest feedback back, saying, I think you're self-obsessed. I think you're. Does that make sense? So, how they give it is the question. But to get an Anam Cara, you need a soul friend who will give you honest criticism. So practice honesty. For meditation, they have found a regular prayer life increases humility. How, I don't know, but I think authentic prayer for some reason makes people more honest. But you can pray for humility yourself. I mean, every time you look at the cross, that's a sign of humility. Or there's icons to humility. Or I do different things. I get on different what do you call that? Things like I love wearing a scapular. Sometimes it's white, sometimes it's green, sometimes it's brown. But I give brown the color of humility. So when I'm wearing the brown scapular, I'm really, every morning when I put it on and I kiss it and put it on and say a prayer, I'm really praying for humility. For me, the brown scapular symbolizes humility. If you notice St. Joseph, he's the humble, he's always wearing brown. You can play that with your prayer life. If that's what you want, humility, make it part of your prayer life. I know this sounds strange, but the fifth one is laughter. And how I connect laughter with humility is you want to develop a self-deprecating sense of humor. That's one thing I really love about my mother. As a teenager, you know how you're always embarrassed about your mother? Now I kind of think, oh my God, she's so funny. But a lot of my mother's humor is self-deprecating. You kind of need that. And even a little bit of harassing humor from your friends. And I say that because this is true. I was talking to this priest yesterday who's from Montana. And this other priest goes to Butte, Montana. He tells a story. This priest, not from Montana, is serving in this parish in Montana, in Butte, Montana. Now, who doesn't know what Butte, Montana is? Okay, it's a harsh Montana mining town. It was at one time. But the Butte people are a little on the harsh side. We'll put it that way. So the joke is, no better friend, no worse enemy. If they like you, they really love you. If they don't like you, you better leave town very quick. But part of the culture of Butte is that everybody has nicknames. So they just give nicknames to people. Does that make sense? So this priest tells a story that also in Butte, when they give communion, they tend to say your name, but everybody has a nickname. And so this priest is handing out communion, and he sees in the communion line 3 people, and he says, oh my God, I don't know their name. He just knows their nickname. And the nicknames are they always use it with your last name. So, Captain Half-Ass McMulligan, and and like they have all these derogatory nicknames, but they're not meant to shame you. They're kind of what friends do. Does that make sense? Yeah. So he looks in line and like, oh, there's Sleepy Eye so-and-so and Captain Half-Ass. He's like, oh my God, I don't know their first name. But the odd part is, like, that self-deprecating sense of humor, it kind of, a little bit of laughter keeps you humble. Does that make sense? And you enjoy your faults. My last piece of advice is less selfies and more of pictures of others. And they did this study, and I didn't write it down so I don't remember, but among millennials, like 90% of their photos are selfies. But photos of other people remind you what's important. So less selfies, more of other people. Okay, so that's humility. So first, let's go with questions, objections, complaints. Yes?
I was thinking of St. Teresa of Lisieux. Autobiography.
Very good.
At first, she seemed to accept suffering, then she welcomed it, then she would even invite it, and it got to the point where, wow, this woman really loved suffering. And I thought she was most humble. How would you relate suffering to humility?
I thought you were going to go in a different direction.
Well, you can.
Oh, well. When I was in the seminary, my spiritual director, I just remember saying this. He said, no, if something humiliating happens to you, you should thank God. Because the only way to get humility is to be humiliated. Well, I kind of question that, but he's right. No, but like, I think about that all the time because, like, you visit the sick and like, oh my God, like horrible things can go wrong with your body. Your knees go out, and it's all embarrassing. Like when you go to the hospital and visit people are kind of embarrassed. Does that make sense? So I often kind of imagine myself in their situation, like, well, what would I do? And my answer is always the same. What would I do if I was in that hospital situation? Well, I'd pray that whatever this suffering is makes me more humble. Let it burn away my arrogance. Or you hear about people who have some, disgrace. Something from their college days, a picture shows up and think, oh my God. Well, what would I do in that situation? I'd pray for the gift of humility. So that's what I think she was going at, that suffering, the only way to get humility sometimes is lean into it. So if you're suffering, pray that it makes you more humble. Kind of like the hospital experience. But I thought you were going to go with this. This is a story I thought you were going to tell. St. Teresa of Lisieux, kind of like Bishop Trent, called herself the Little Flower. And she admits in her autobiography, some of these nuns have a lot more talent than I do. Some are huge roses and sunflowers. They have amazing talent. I don't have their talent, but I can enjoy their talent. And Teresa says, what's better, being the artist or appreciating a piece of artwork? God is a divine artist, and he gave you, you're a big rose, and you're a sunflower. I don't have your talent, but if I enjoy the fact that you have it, aren't I praising God? Does that, like, the humble, that's where I thought you were going. But yeah, I do consider, wow, what do you do in these situations where they're suffering? I think you pray that, wow, I guess I hope that I'm just more freed from my ego. Because this sounds kind of strange. Have you ever thought, well, if everything always goes well, if you've never had a medical problem or something embarrassing, how do you know you wouldn't turn out to be a narcissist? You can't even imagine yourself being in that situation. That's.
You told us how your father's suffering changed him.
That's true, yeah.
We've heard that several times.
Yeah, good memory. Oh, yes.
So, Father, both this narcissism and humility, are they inherited or acquired?
That's interesting. I don't know. I personally think some virtues are just part of our DNA. I can go off on my medical theory on that, but I have no medical degree. But I just really do think different people are prone to different virtues, but we can work at them all.
Yeah.
So
We
yeah,
can acquire it
yeah.
in our lifetime.
So it doesn't matter. Like I honestly think I'm prone to anger, so I guess I have to work more on it. Maybe some people are more prone to narcissism. So what? Work on it.
So, Father, what's the difference between joy and happiness?
Joy is long term, and joy is not you can be joyful in suffering. You can't be happy in suffering. So like they often translate Socrates and mistranslate Socrates and Aristotle when Aristotle says the point of life is happiness, but actually the Greek word he uses eudaimonia, which means good soul. Where the point of you might be suffering, but you can still be joyful. So, narcissists can't, because unless they have everything they want, there is no joy. So they can be happy, but it doesn't last long.
May I share my story about Bishop Trinan? I know I've shared it with you before.
I don't remember it, but you go ahead.
I had taken a bunch of teens to ICYC up in Idaho Falls at that time.
She captured a bunch of teens and took them to ICYC in Idaho Falls.
And we had all gathered in the dining room for lunch. And I happened to walk by, and Bishop Trinan was sitting with a young man who had lovely long hair. And they were talking very quietly. And I saw him reach over and take his hand and just brush the hair off of this young man's face, because it was kind of hanging in his eyes. And I thought, what a gesture of humility for the bishop. And it was so loving, you could just see the love in his eyes for this young man, who I'm sure he probably had never encountered before. And it was just a beautiful symbol to me of humility on the bishop's part.
Actually, he really could. He just loved everybody. But I think it was really tied to his humility. Nobody was better than anybody else. Everybody was special with him. Yes, Jane.
Does anyone know Father Casby? Did you ever? That was total humility. That was the most wonderful priest in the whole world. He was just kind and gentle, and he'd buy your cookies after CCD.
Here?
Have cookies. He was in Gooding.
Casby?
Casby.
Never heard of him. Wow.
I was curious about the verse, I pray that you may prosper in, your soul and health, which I guess is talking about emotions and then about the physical body. And I've been through a lot of illness, with too much to even tell you about, But I noticed that on the mechanical side of life, the physical side of life, that it doesn't always have to be like some kind of miracle to get your body healthy, And when I found that when I began to, kind of obey and sort of submit to the principles of, okay, I need to do this and I need to do this, and these were just, what my doctors told me. My emotional health improved, and then it allowed my spiritual health to improve. So I think that holiness has a kind of a personification on different levels, and on the physical level, it's sort of like a wholeness, right? It's the body becomes more whole, and I think a lot of people. That's a really fundamental thing, and I find that I missed it for a long time. I did.
Well, that's right. I think you need examples of this paradox, because it does say prosper in the Bible, but how Catholics interpret it is different than Protestants. Protestants, it's usually economic and health. But have you ever thought, wow, I prosper most? That's the story of my father. He actually prospered. He became more spiritual with more illnesses. Or there's a woman, Isabella, who, gosh, she had a stroke and then put on Coumadin. Do you remember Isabella Booth? So she had all these medical problems, quite serious. I go over to her house to anoint her, ring the doorbell. She's not there. I'm like, that's strange. I look over in the neighbor's yard and she's gardening. And it's like, she shouldn't be. She just had a stroke and is on Coumadin. And so I go over and, like, how old was she? Like 90 years old? And so I go over and said, Isabella, what are you doing? She says, oh, this poor woman at this this house, she's pregnant, and look at all these weeds. And, like, here's the odd part. She's the one who literally is on that, threshold of serious medical problems on Coumadin and all this other stuff. And she's pulling weeds at 90 in somebody else's yard. Like, even her physical illness, which she completely knew, didn't diminish, like, her joy and happiness or even her ability to care for others. So now I do have to get ready for a funeral. So I did want to end with a discussion question. So if you guys want to stick around, this is, who taught you humility? 3 questions. Who taught you humility? Who is the greatest example of humility? What do you think, like for me, if ego is the problem, one of mine is that I always have to be right. That's where's your problem with humility? Does that make any sense? Because we all have it. If you guys doubt it, ask your spouse. They'll tell you. And what is one way, share at the table, one way you can increase your humility? So share, have some more coffee and cookies. Thank you guys for putting out coffee, and I'll see you next week.